So I guess it's time to turn the flange on this inner fender here, like I did the other side. So I guess first things first, I'll crawl underneath the fender and mark the inside of our fender edge so we know just how much to trim off and tip for the turn. So I'll start off by marking the inside edge of our fender. That way I know right where the edge is. And from there I can pull this inner piece off, and we can go to the welding table and offset our tipped edge with some tape. But gotta make sure we get a nice clean line first. All right, now we have the panel back off the car, and you can see here, at least hopefully you can see it, the blue Sharpie mark. I also used a metal scribe to scribe some of the areas that were hard to get the marker in. So that's going to be our cut line, and I'm going to use this 1/2 inch blue fine line tape to lay out or offset our edge, and then that will be our final cut edge. And I'm using a 1/2 inch tape because that's what I measured out for the drop down that'll work for the panel itself. So I will get the tape all laid out on the panel, and we'll trim it, file it, and move forward. All right, so I got the edge all trimmed off, and I ran a Vixen file down the edge to get it nice and straight. And I really want to make sure this edge is completely flat and straight, because we're using this edge as our guide when we go to the Linux to do the tipping process. So if there's any waves in our edge, those waves will transfer through the back gauge on the Linux, and it'll make our tipped edge or our turned edge wavy. So it's very critical to file that edge nice and straight so our edge turns nice and straight. All right, here I am at the Linux, which is similar to a Pullmax, and it's got a sharp, an upper tool that's kind of sharp pointed, and that will create the tip itself. And then the bottom has a flat face on it, and it will support the panel. And I've got the back gauge set up for the 1/2 inch offset. So as it comes down, it'll thin the metal, and it'll allow it to slightly fold. And we can slowly fold that up over multiple passes, and that will create our turned or our tipped edge. All right, now we've started tipping. You can see that the line is slightly thinned, and that's what I mentioned before with the tipping edge thinning the metal and allowing it to fold in that area. I'm applying a little bit of upward pressure, and that will allow the metal to fold. As we make multiple passes, I increase that upward pressure a little bit at a time, and we'll get the tipped edge folded up as far as we can. And once we get to a certain point, right there in that radius, I'm gonna have to start stretching that flange up, because as it comes around that curve to get it into a vertical position, we're gonna have to stretch the edge. So I'll move over to the kick shrinker and stretcher, and I'll stretch that edge up just a little bit when we get to that point. All right, got the majority of the tipped flange turned up, and like I mentioned, now we're going to go to the kick shrinker and stretcher, and we're going to lightly stretch this edge to get it to relax up and keep the compound shape where it needs to be. So I'm going to work down the flange with just very little pressure. We're not going to get too carried away. I'd rather do a little bit at a time and creep up on it, and instead of getting too carried away and getting sharp stretch marks and kind of a jagged line. So slow, steady increments, and just work the panel back and forth. From here, I'm going to use a hammer and dolly to essentially knock the flange up to a 90 degree. On the Linux, you can't really get to a complete 90 with a tipping set. You can get to about 75 to 80 degrees depending on the panel. So I'm just going to use the hammer and dolly to set that edge up to a 90, and I'm going to use the sharp edge of the dolly in the thinned area where I use the tipping tool. I'm going to ride that right there in that groove, and that will continue to fold the edge right on the thinned line from the tipping tool. So I'll start at one end, working slowly, and work all the way down the panel a little bit at a time, and then repeat that process. Just like with the kick shrinker, you don't want to get too carried away and create excessive tooling marks. So I'm taking my time to slowly turn the edge. All right, got the flange all roughed in, so we're going to test fit it to the car and kind of see how it fits. And for the first time fitting it up with the flange turned, doesn't look too bad. So I'll get a marker, and we're going to have to stretch the edge a little bit more here. As you can see that it's kind of flush here, and then it starts to stick up. So we need a little bit more stretch there. And back here, we're going to come in and we're going to shrink this part of the edge, because it's got a little bit of a bow in it this way, so it doesn't line up with the fender top. So I'm going to grab a marker real quick, and then we'll mark those spots, and we can get that adjusted. And what I'm doing is, this was a cleco hole, and here is the notch from the cleco hole. So I'm just kind of lining those up so we know we're in the ballpark. And here from the side profile, you can kind of see where that sticks up. So we need to stretch this edge a little bit more. And here we need to shrink a little bit. I'll kind of transfer that to this side. Yeah, even looking down it, we can get a good camera angle there. You can see that bow right about there. So that's what we're going to work on taking out. Bring that back just a little bit. Especially when you can see it visually, you know right where it needs corrected. So just like before, I'm not getting too carried away. Just working a little bit at a time to shrink this flange. I'm just kind of eyeball a little bit, see how close we're getting. That looks pretty close for the shrinking. So I'll switch our dies out, flip them around for stretching, and we'll adjust that front part of the flange. All right, back to the car for a test fit. It looks like that about did it. Everything lines out pretty nice. And we're lined up with our notch from our previous Cleco hole. So I'll put the Clecos back in and put these two pieces together, and then I can drill and Cleco into the flange here so it matches what I've done on the other side, and then I can make notes of areas I still want to planish out and things that I need to kind of fine tune to get this piece about wrapped up. All right, I'm gonna keep drilling and get this all fit up and ready to move forward. So make sure to stay tuned for part 2, where I refine the shape of this, get everything dialed in, and then I'm going to start on the center section of the inner structure that comes back up under the hood and then covers the top part of the intake plenum there.